Observe this, brother.
All right, we're back with Observe This. This is show number 3. I'm bringing on the hosts of Brace for Impact, the Impact Wrestling podcast on the Fight Game Media Network. We're going to talk about Against All Odds. We're also going to talk about a bunch of different Impact Wrestling topics. I've been out of the Impact loop, but thanks to Mike's articles on the website, I feel like I'm a little bit back in. I haven't gotten all the way to watching shows and stuff, but we're going to talk about Impact. We're going to talk about some of these upcoming matches, some possible news, or actually, I'll see if I can get any news out of these guys. But first, so you guys saw the intro video. The name of this show is a little bit of a joke on a old World War III WCW pay-per-view with Hulk Hogan, where he talks about burning a copy of the Wrestling Observer. Like, your wrestling fandom, you guys are younger than me, but would you have known what was going on there at that pay-per-view? I don't even know if you guys were watching wrestling at that time.
Yeah, so I was watching live that night, and I had no idea what was going on. I had never heard of the Observer, never heard of Dave Meltzer. I found out about him probably 2 years later. I would say in 1997, I was listening to this radio show on the cable radio network. So when you have like basic cable, when you're flicking through the channels, there's always like one channel back then that would just do advertisements, and in the background they would have like talk radio. And on the cable radio network, they had this guy named the Shadow Man, and he would come on every Friday night. Me and my friends would listen to him, and he would always read stuff from the Wrestling Observer. That's how I found out about him. But that was, a couple years later.
JD, before I get your answer, I have a very similar situation as Mike, but mine was in 1991. It was the same cable radio network. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the syndication for shows was like, but a guy by the name of Dynamite D, who worked out of a wrestling gym called Slammers in SoCal, he did the same thing. Like, I knew about Flair leaving WCW, I want to say, like, I don't know, 2 months before it actually happened, or maybe like 2 or 3 months before he actually showed up in WWF at the time. So very similar stories there with the cable radio network. You know who else has a similar experience as John the Rocco? We both kind of were listening to the same stuff back then. But JD, did you understand that reference at the time?
Kinda. I didn't read the Torch, but I used to, like in like 93, 94, I would call up this free hotline, and it was like, I think the guy's name was Cody Boynes, and he would like basically regurgitate Observer and Torch information and kind of pass it off. So I knew passingly who Meltzer and the Torch were, but it didn't really land home for me. Like I started learning what it was all about probably like 97, 98 is when I started learning what that meant. Yeah. So it completely went over my head at the time.
It's so funny. All the things we would do, Mike and I staring at just a copy of text rolling over a blank screen to listen to radio news. You dialing in to listen to wrestling news. Kind of crazy, all the things that we would do just to find out the scoops so we could tell our friends and maybe they would think we were cool. All right, so let's talk about this. I wanted you guys on. I told you that I wanted to talk about Impact. You guys have a very fun show. I get to edit it every week talking about Impact Wrestling. And I think my first thing about this is I literally was looking through some stuff, and the reason why is because I'm reading some of the old Observers. So the current ones are the current old issues are in 2004. So I'm reading through, and this is right when TNA gets their Fox Sports deal. So they're paying for TV to get on Fox Sports, hoping that it would, raise their visibility and sell their pay-per-views. And I was just like, holy crap! Like 2004, they'd actually been on, for a couple years before that. 2002, they started running shows in 2002. We're in 2021. Next year is going to be 20 years of TNA/Impact Wrestling. That's insane to me. Like, the idea that these guys have been able to stay afloat keep their heads above water, and in some instances, barely above water. In this wrestling zeitgeist, always sort of, below WWE, but everyone is. There's nothing wrong with that. But Mike, like, I know you've been following these guys for a long time. Like, what does that say? Like 20 years of being able to run, like AEW is in year 2 and we're making such a big deal out of it. 20 years is gigantic. It's a long time. I'm so amazed that, next year, 20 years, what does that mean to you?
I think that's a big deal. They, when WCW died, I never thought that we would ever, and ECW died at the same time, right? At the time, I never thought that we would get another alternative again, because WWF at the time, they took all the WCW, the ECW talent, and they were kind of hoarding talent back then at the time. And, when I started hearing rumblings of this new NWA TNA thing, it didn't really seem sustainable, and turns out that it wasn't at the time, because they were doing like a weekly pay-per-view, and I didn't think that it would last very long, and I'm happy that it did. I'm shocked that it did. They went through those early years there in the Nashville Fairgrounds where they were doing the weekly $10 pay-per-views. I bought a handful of them, and I back then we're still trading tapes, so I had some tapes of them too. And I always thought that they were entertaining. I wouldn't exactly call them good. They had a lot of good matches, but a lot of it was just kind of sleazy. If you go back and watch it right now, it doesn't really hold up very well. But not only did they go through those early years where they were essentially almost bankrupt, they went through several different financiers. Their original financier got indicted. Right, he is the Richard Scrushy, the guy who's the Health South guy out of Alabama. He ends up getting indicted, so he has to pull all his funds. And then Dixie Carter comes in as the big financier with Panda Energy and her family, and they're going for a little while. All of a sudden that well runs dry. They lose their TV deal on Spike. They lose Destination America a year later, and then they get on Pop, and all of a sudden they keep hemorrhaging money, and then they get sold to Anthem, and then next thing you know, here we are. We're on Access TV, and it seems like they're probably, the most stable they have been in a very long time. I would say they're the most, they're not the most successful they've been in forever. I would say that the years that they were in primetime on Spike would have been their peak. But as far as stability goes, I don't think there's a question right now that Impact's going out of business. I think people jokingly say that, but I don't think anybody really believes that. I think that they're owned by a media company. They're the top brand on that network, and they're the top brand on their Canadian channel as well. And I don't think that they're going anywhere for a very long time.
JD, how long have you been following these guys?
Off and on since show number 1. I bought the first TNA, what was it called? NWA TNA pay-per-view, and I watched it with my dad. I was really excited to have, because I was always more of a WCW than a WWF guy, and so I was real excited to get an alternative. And I remember watching that first show and going, that was awful. I'll never watch that again. And when I remember I was working in the weight, right out of college, I got my first job. I was working in the weight room at my old high school. I was coaching, and I would watch, I think it was on Thursday afternoons when it was on Fox Sports Net, and I just put it on in the weight room while I was working out, and I kind of got back in that way. And then the early Spike years, and I was, in and out. It wasn't when I started, I was kind of into the Aces and Eights stuff and fell out of that. And then Matt Hardy's goofiness really got me interested again, because it was so bizarre and different than everything else that was being done in wrestling at the time, that it got me watching TNA regularly again. I think that was the Pop phase. I think it was when they were on Pop. Yeah. And then when Jeff Jarrett and Bruce Pritchard came in, they ruined everything, and I was checked out for another couple of years. And then the Kenny Omega brought me back. So I was one of those guys that started checking out again, and that's kind of around the time I met Mike and started talking about this stuff on Twitter, and it's been a fun show lately.
Yeah, I have a similar. I'm sorry, Garrett.
No, go for it.
I have a similar story to JD's, where I watched some of the early pay-per-views. I thought I didn't think that it was particularly very good, but I did like their X Division guys. I like AJ Styles and Low Ki and Jerry Lynn and Amazing Red. But whenever they got their TV deal on Spike, I did watch some of the Fox Sports Net stuff. But when they got their TV deal on Spike, I would say in 05 or 06 when they hit prime time, they were my favorite. That was my favorite wrestling show for a little while.
Mine too.
Yeah, WWE, they had so many shows going on at the time, and they were all just very similar to me, and I was getting bored by it. And I would say up until about the Aces and Eights stuff, when that just kind of went to crap, and Hulk Hogan really, I thought drug it down a little bit, the quality of the show. And then when he was gone, I thought the show got a little bit better, and then they went ups and downs, and then I would say probably I didn't really watch regularly from about 2013 till about 2018. And that's when, after Jarrett had essentially gotten fired again, and then Scott D'Amore and Don Callis had taken over the creative there, and that's when I really started to get back into it.
So, I would imagine, like what JD said, there's a little bit more tension around Impact because of Kenny Omega. But I feel like even last year, Impact was doing a pretty good job about creating interest. Now, a lot of it was about people who were not coming in, but that's part of the gig, right? Is you're creating interest in the possibility of stuff happening. Now when you deliver, it's great. When you don't, it's not too great. But I don't feel like they said, oh, this person is coming in and then they just don't show up. They were trying to get fans with the idea that WWE cuts guys. We're going to try to bring some in. And I'm sure when they played that video, they were following social media going like, okay, who's the people that these fans would really respond to? So let's actually give people a primer. If I'm sure the people who are listening to this or watching this, I'm sure many of them have an idea of what's going on, but there's going to be folks who are kind of just checking in because JD and myself and Micah are chit-chatting. So for those folks, give me a quick primer on what's going on with Impact right now. Who is, doing really good things that people don't know about? Like, what are some hot storylines as we head into this Against All Odds, and then after that Slammiversary? But what would you say are the things that people should be paying attention to right now, Mike?
Right now, I would say the hottest star in Impact, and someone that's become probably my favorite wrestler in the company, is Josh Alexander. He is on just an incredible run where they're trying to make him into a legendary X Division champion. He just had an Iron Man match, which is available on YouTube. I shared it in the Facebook group, and
we'll talk about that in a second. I definitely want to dig in more on that.
And I would say that's one of the best matches in company history, and that's going back a long time, and it's definitely the best match since Anthem has taken over. Moose is another guy. I think that if you saw Moose whenever he was in his Ring of Honor days, or whenever he was early in his Impact days, he was just kind of a bland football player type, where he was just your baby face. I remember in Ring of Honor, he had those stupid ass shoulder pads that he would wear, where they were way too small for him, and he was very green. He was raw, very athletic, but he just didn't have it all together. He has put it all together now. He's got the in-ring work is crisp. His character work is insane. His costumes, his ring music, his promo ability. The moment that he comes out of the curtain, he is the biggest star in the room. No matter who's in the facility.
Still weird on Twitter.
Still, yeah. Not great.
That's a company thing, though. Like half the roster is very weird on Twitter. So
yes,
that's kind of a necessity.
Right. Well, and I think good thing about working for Impact, they don't monitor your Twitter. Bad thing about working for Impact, they don't monitor your Twitter. So I think that if he hires a company to tweet for him, I think he could be one of the biggest stars in wrestling. But he just doesn't have that ability to shut up when he needs to shut up. So, those two just off the top of my head, I would say are two guys that you need to go out of your way to watch. And then when you talk about some young guys coming up, you got Ace Austin, who's a guy that I've really been I've been really hammering home, like, hey, you guys need to watch this guy when he's on TV. He's been a multiple-time X Division champion. He's in a tag team right now, but he does a lot of singles work. He reminds me a lot of a young AJ Styles, a little bit smaller than him, but he has a lot of those same abilities. And then another guy is his name is Chris Bay. I think that he's another young up-and-comer. Those two guys are likely, when their contract is over, and I don't know when that is. AEW and WWE are both going to be in the market for them. They're probably going to get some good money out of those two companies.
So, JD, you're kind of coming back into this thing. Omega is the reason that you started watching again. But as you've been watching, like, who has also stood out? I'm guessing you're going to say Alexander too. Yeah. He's got the headgear. He's got the amateur wrestling thing going on.
He's my guy, definitely number one right now. Like we were talking about on our show last week. I definitely think he's having the run of his career right now, and they're really building that X division around him, like to the point where people still get confused about what the X division is. Someone said, "Oh, he should be in the best of the Super Juniors." I'm like, dude, he's 240 pounds. Like that man cannot be a Super Junior. But that's the cliche has always been about no limits, not weight limits. So I mean, but that's true in the case of Josh Alexander.
Right,
he's awesome. That Iron Man match was fantastic. He's the highlight of every week. I like Ace Austin. If you like X-Men, you will like Ace Austin because he cosplays Gambit every time he comes out, which is weird, but he's a good wrestler. Chris Bay is awesome. He's definitely someone you got to keep an eye on.
I see him on Twitter. He's definitely a Twitter personality who gets a lot of retweets.
Yeah, he's smart too.
Very savvy.
I think he's a future star, to be honest with you. Like, he's really figuring out the social media. He's young. He's like 23, 24, something like that. So he's got a nice long career ahead of him. And there's some veterans in the company too that are entertaining. Johnny Swinger is one of the most entertaining parts of the show every week. And you want to start up, you want to hate it. You want to say this guy is terrible, these jokes aren't funny, and then you've watched the show for 3 weeks and you can't stop laughing. Because it works. The man is hilarious. He has rebuilt himself. He's this guy from the 90s who's rebuilt himself as someone from the 80s. And it doesn't make sense, but it's hilarious. It's one of the best parts of the show. And comedy and wrestling, I think it's tough to pull off. And I think more often than not, it comes off more embarrassing than it comes funny. But for some reason, Swinger's Palace works. It's utterly hilarious.
So there's two guys that I want to dig a little bit deeper into. One of them is somebody who I've had the pleasure of interviewing, Rich Swann. Now, he and Kenny Omega had a match a couple months ago. That was, I thought it was promoted really well, as best as you can do without that AEW or WWE budget. Where does Rich stand for you guys? And we'll start with Mike, because I do think there's a little bit of a retribution story there, but there's also this Twitter audience who thinks that they know something about his story, about why he was fired by WWE. So it's a little hard with that audience, and that audience is a giant part of Impact's fan base, or possible fan base that they could actually grow. But I've always been entertained with this guy. I remember seeing him at indie shows coming out to the Lionel Richie song and just being like, this is one of the greatest entrances I've ever seen in my life. But what's your take on Rich?
I love Rich Swann. He is a guy that's really been hurt by not having a crowd, because a lot of what he does is play off of the crowd. Me and JD had talked about it before Rebellion, which was back in April. Rich Swann is a modern day Ricky Morton in the ring, where he is just selling and selling and selling and selling. He is a perennial babyface. I don't think that he would even have the ability to be a heel, and I don't think that he should. And I know, Garrett, I found out a lot of this stuff whenever you interviewed him. Like, his injury was career threatening to where he was never going to walk again, and he was able to persevere through that. And they told that story very well in the lead up to Bound for Glory last year with his match with Eric Young. And unfortunately, I enjoyed that match, but it did fall a little flat because it was, Eric Young getting heat on him for, 15 minutes, and there's no fans in the crowd, and they had no crowd noise. And I think, at Rebellion, his match with Kenny Omega, while very good, I think people kind of saw it as a disappointment a little bit, because he got his ass kicked the entire match and then he lost. And so I think some of the steam got taken out of him. And I do think that he was gassed out in that match a little bit. And I think that that's why he had some time off. And now we're going to see him this Saturday night against Big Cass, aka W. Morrissey. And I think that, Rich probably loses that match and he continues to take a couple steps back. But I think if he re-signs with Impact, I know his contract was up not too long ago. If he ends up re-signing with Impact, he's probably going to be a guy there that's going to be in the upper half of the card for, a long time to come. And they love him, and they should love him. I think he's great.
So one thing, because the other person that I wanted to talk about is the person you just mentioned, the former Big Cass. We'll talk about him in a second. But One of my fears, and this is a very casual Impact follower fear, because I didn't know. I wasn't watching the TV. I didn't see the Omega and Callis stuff. But my fear was that Omega is coming in so hot that you have this opportunity with Rich to build him up. But the timing is, okay, Omega's here. We've got to bring Omega. Now he's the guy. And I wondered if it was going to hurt Rich along the way in losing this match. Do you think it did?
I don't think losing to Omega hurts you. I think that if in the match, if you don't hold up to your end of the bargain as far as star quality and as far as, having a great match, the reason why that was a great match, 10 minutes into it, it seemed like Rich was gassed and Kenny started just wrestling. He was having the match by himself essentially. And I think people saw that, and it wasn't really losing the match. It was kind of the way he lost the match. And that was probably out of necessity. Now, some people said that he got hurt early in the match, and that's why it seemed like Kenny was wrestling himself. But if it was he's gassed or he's injured, I do think that I think that hurt him a little bit. I don't think losing to Omega hurts him one bit, not at all. But the how he lost did hurt.
So, JD, when I mentioned the former Big Cass and Mike had said his new wrestling name, you kind of smirked there. Do you think it's not the greatest name for him?
The worst name in the history of professional, or at least modern. Like, it's a law firm, W. Morrissey. Like, it sounds like a personal injury attorney, chasing your ambulance down. Like, I get it, it's his name, and you can't call him Morrissey because the fat guy who used to be with the Smiths. So you got to go with something. But it's Bill would have been better than W.
Well, I noticed that his Twitter is still like the whatever, whatever that
the
is.
Worst indie name of all time in the last modern era. So I mean, he's not had a good run with choosing names. That being said, I'm really impressed with his kind of resurrection. Like, he looks great. He had a great, speaking of Rich Swann, they had a great angle between the two of them last week on Impact where they shot it really well. We see so much bad production in wrestling that it made me really happy with how well this segment was shot. And it came off really good. I always want to call him Cass. Morrissey came off looking like a monster. And again, Swann is so good at just, getting beat up and really selling and trying to get that sympathy that the mugging, I'll call it, really, really came off well. And I think it's a matter of time before we see Moose and Morrissey wrestling for the title.
Yeah.
They're really attempting, it seems like, to do this size thing, because Rich is a small guy, and Cass, the ex-Cass, is a giant human being. So that'll be quite the spectacle when they do wrestle. Okay, a couple other people, actually one other person, and then we'll move on. What's the deal with Kylie Ray? I saw that she showed up at an NWA show. I think she did an indie show. What is her status? Because I remember alongside Dave Meltzer, we interviewed Deanna literally the night before her match with Kylie, and then Kylie ends up not showing up for that match. So what is her status with Impact? Is she still under contract with them? Do you expect her to come back and be a part of their roster?
No, so Impact and NWA worked out a deal to where Kylie could get out of her contract, and so now she's under contract in NWA. So that deal came about within the last couple of weeks. Sean Rossap reported that, so he got the scoop on that deal. But I think that she was in a tough spot. The company really got put in a tough spot.
Yeah.
I think they tried to make the best out of the situation that they could. It's one of those things that you really never know how to deal with it until it actually happens. When someone has anxiety like that and they can't perform. I know I've had to deal with it with some of the people that I supervise, right?
Yeah.
And so and I had a little bit of experience with that, so you never really know what the right way to handle it is, and so you just do the best you can. But she wanted to come back after retiring, and I think Impact probably wanted her to come back there, but she obviously didn't feel like she wanted to go back, so they went ahead and worked out a deal with NWA.
All right, let's switch gears and let's talk about Kenny Omega. And JD, I'll start with you. It seems to me, and I think business backs this up, that this has been a giant success for Impact. The pay-per-views, I think they did their biggest pay-per-view for Rebellion most recently, was the biggest one in recent history. And so while you're watching the TV, does it feel like Kenny Omega is kind of the person who you kind of, all eyes are on? Does he feel like a star on Impact Wrestling?
Yeah, absolutely. When Kenny shows up, everything kind of gets elevated another level. I've talked about how I actually prefer Kenny's portrayal in this show to AEW. I think he comes off more like 80s Flair when he would come into a territory. Like he comes off as the champion, the traveling champion, like almost like a little bit more like Memphis Flair when he was surrounded by all the craziness of Memphis, and Flair had to tone it down a little bit. Yeah. It feels like when he's at Impact, Kenny has to kind of pull back a little bit, not all the time, but we don't get quite the megalomaniacal Kenny Omega we see in AEW sometimes. So it definitely elevates the company. The pandemic really sucks because I think that if this had happened with fans, Impact fans are so passionate that I truly believe that they would hate him. I truly believe if we were in the real Impact era, he would come out there and people would absolutely hate him because we've seen it. We see the guys that talk to us. A lot of Impact fans hate the idea of an AEW guy having their title, which is the entire point. That's why they're doing it. Like, it's working. Unfortunately, when they brought Kenny in, the show, I'll be honest, it was not as good then as it is now. Like, when they brought Kenny in December, it was a rough watch. Like, I did not like a lot of the stuff they were doing. The show has improved. Credit to Scott D'Amore. It has improved greatly. I think they had a big opportunity in December, right after Kenny won that title, and they didn't really stick the landing. They were doing a lot of stupid stuff at the time, and I think they've really curbed their product. We talk about how they should need to appeal to the hardcore fan base more because that's who they can market to. And they've started to do that, like the example, the 60-minute Iron Man match. I mean, who's that for? That is for people like us that are on wrestling Twitter that are going to talk about these things. So that's all good. And having this centerpiece player, like Kenny Omega and Jon Moxley are the two biggest name wrestlers outside of the WWE system in the US. So you've got one of them. And I do think it's helped. It definitely has helped Impact raise. People are like, well, what does Impact get out of this? The answer is money. They get money. A lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mike, Don Callis was working as an executive at Impact. He is no longer. He is now sort of full-time wrestling talent, wrestling manager.
Guy likes to lie a lot. Let me tell you.
I know. I should have asked JD this question since he's the one who had the interview that went very viral. That thing was going for. It felt like weeks and weeks and weeks.
Very proud of it.
But so I guess my question is now that Callis isn't an executive with Impact, do you think that changes the relationship or could possibly change the plan of what they do with Omega in Impact?
No, I don't think so, because I still think that there is a friendship there. And the thing about Scott D'Amore, at least that I've heard, is he is an easy guy to work with. And I know that maybe this was Omega and Callis kind of putting the ideas out there into the ether, but the two guys that brokered the deal were Khan and D'Amore, right? Don Callis was kind of let go from New Japan Pro Wrestling, hasn't really had much to do with them. D'Amore is the one that really built that bridge back between New Japan and Impact Wrestling. And I'm not taking anything away from Don Callis, but Don Callis was more of a creative guy, and Scott D'Amore was kind of like the business end of everything. And so I don't think that it really changes it at all. I think that, Callis leaving Impact and going with AEW was kind of in the cards already, and this was all a part of the deal. Because I do know that he was under kind of a contract there, and they're paying him a lot of money to be an executive, and for him to kind of move on from that, I think this is probably part of the deal that they had worked out for this all to be able to happen. So I don't know when we'll see Omega lose the title and when we'll see them no longer on the TV show. I think they're teasing it all the time, which is kind of a smart thing to do. It keeps us interested, and they're kind of throwing things at Kenny and threatening to take away the title, and so that's kind of part of the whole story. But no, I don't really see that changing too much at all.
We'll talk about the storyline thing that is possibly going to happen at this week's TV, though we don't know for sure. With Khan actually being a part of that, I'll save that for a little bit. But JD, Mike talked about kind of reopening the relationship with New Japan. I think we've seen Phantasmo, we've seen Kojima. How do you think that has that added to the television show and to the brand?
Finjuice too. We see
Finjuice, right? Tag champs.
Absolutely, because like I was joking with Mike during the 60-minute Iron match, the entire roster came out to watch it, and it looked like a small lumberjack match. Like this roster is not very deep. So, and Mike has talked about how one of Callus's ideas was to make it like All Japan, where you have your core, and then you bring in people to work with the core, which makes perfect sense. Yeah. So, in order to keep that alive, you need to have a constant supply of people coming in, and I think working with New Japan is a great idea. I love what the wrestling world is shaping into outside of the WWE, where you have this symbiosis between all these different promotions where everyone's kind of giving and taking, and it's not everyone wants these big invasions and these big super cards, and that's not reality. What's reality is I give you this, you give me that, and then you give me this and I give you that, and it's a little bit here and a little bit there, so it doesn't get overwhelming. Like having Satoshi Kojima come out on Impact is something that a year ago I couldn't fathom,
right?
And yet I just watched it. So it's been a lot of fun, and getting New Japan guys, because let's be honest, they're going to want to tour the States again. And the last time they actually tried to tour the States, it didn't go well. So they're going to need to have their guys on American television more frequently, and they're going to need partners who are going to willing to help them sell tickets. And between AEW, ROH, Impact, I think it could be a perfect marriage, and I think it just helps strengthen everybody's TV product.
So here's a question. Now, in a perfect world, New Japan comes back. They run Madison Square Garden. It would actually be pretty amazing if they did have these partnerships with all of these three different companies, and then you get a little bit of intermingling with the U.S. companies being on the show. Now, how that works for pay-per-view or for whatever TV or whatever, like they'll have to figure that stuff out. But like you said, JD, that wasn't something that we could actually fathom, too long ago. And I think with AEW putting a little bit of pressure as the number 2, and then it makes everyone else raise their game to an extent, right? So I really like that idea. But I wanted to follow up with you about, what we were just talking about. Forget it. I lost my train of thought because then I went somewhere else. But so let's talk about this match that happened, the 60-minute, and then it went into an extra overtime, right? So I didn't get to watch the whole thing, but I kind of clicked through it because I wanted to see what it looked like. I wanted to see the environment, and I saw the wrestlers surrounded at ringside. I watched the falls. I kind of watched what the story was, which was Josh goes up very early, and then TJP, my favorite person, TJP, he's got to just go until the very end. It's all this drama, hitting this move, got a pin, and he gets it right at the bell. And I thought that was very well done. I thought it was really well done. Mm-hmm. Then you go to the overtime, and Alexander, I don't know what that move is called, but he hits that that pile driver. That looked awesome. I was like, oh my God, that looked devastating. And so the guy who stands out to me, because I've seen TJP wrestle for years and years and years, is Alexander. And my wonder is, when you get a guy like that, now we just saw WWE cut a bunch of people, so it doesn't look, they're not adding talent just for the sake of adding talent right now. But you do have this number 2 in AEW who's adding people a lot, and I look at that guy and I'm like, wow, he is somebody who is not on everybody's radar yet, but soon will be. And for Impact, this has been the story essentially of some of their life cycle, not their entire life cycle, but when somebody does make a little bit of a name, how do they keep him?
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's how Josh Alexander got big. They were the tag team. It was him and Ethan Page, the North. Mm-hmm. Ethan Page is the one that got big, right? Everyone would talk about Ethan Page, and then he bounced when he had the chance, and that really shined the spotlight on Josh Alexander, who was, I don't want to say the forgotten member of the team, but he's definitely the one that didn't get the shine. So he got he took advantage of a perfect situation, and they like, you're loyal, you're awesome, we're going to run with you. And they finally gave him a chance to shine a little bit. So when people leave, it creates opportunity, I think.
Mike, you've seen this happen before where their talent gets rated. That's always kind of got to be in the back of your mind as a diehard fan of this brand, right?
Yeah, it really is one of the disappointing things about being an Impact fan and then covering Impact is because, when you're watching it so much, you get kind of attached to them. It's almost like being a fan of a college football team, to where it's like, hey, they're coming in, and Alexander was probably like a redshirt freshman. He didn't get a whole lot of reps, and then all of a sudden he starts to get hot, and then now he's on his own, and he's becoming he's one of their top stars right now. He's probably in their top 5. And at any moment, his contract's going to come due. And I don't know what his contract status is. I don't know how long it is for. But, he would be foolish, considering he has a family and he has bills to pay. He would be foolish not to go and play that free agent market. Now, a guy like Alexander, he's been around for about 15, 16 years. He's not a rookie. He's been around a long time. He's had some pretty bad injuries. I know he retired at one point due to a neck injury, but it seems like he's in peak physical condition, peak health. And, if you're AEW and you're taking a look at that guy, he is a guy that you would want. You would be stupid not to. WWE, they take a look at that guy. They see his injury history. They see his age. They probably maybe don't want him. Or if they do, they're going to want to keep him in catering or keep him in, NXT. Yeah. The main thing with him and Ethan Page in their tag team is Ethan Page did the promos, and Alexander didn't really do a whole lot of those. Well, he just cut a hellacious fucking promo this past week, right after his match was over, to where like you felt it and you believed every word he said. Now he might not be the most charismatic guy, but when he talks, people listen, and I believe him, and I think that's very important. So I think any company would love to have a guy like that on their crew. So it's happened time and time again. You take a look at. Since 2018, since I've been rewatching, you take a look at just AEW. You got LAX, you got the Lucha Brothers, you got Brian Cage, who was just their world champion right before he went over there. You got Ethan Page, and there's been many others. And then you take a look at over at WWE, you got Eli Drake, you got John Morrison, you got MSK, who is actually. The one time I'll say this about WWE taking an Impact guy and making them and bringing them into their company, it was, MSK is actually doing a lot better than they were when they were on Impact. They're being presented a lot better. On Impact, they were just undercard comedy guys who smoked weed in a treehouse, right? did all that stuff. And I thought that stuff was funny, but I never took them seriously. But they have done really well for themselves over on WWE. Oh, and they just got Taya. Yeah, Taya was their longest rating women's champion ever, and they just brought them in. So, but that's kind of what they have kind of marketed themselves to talent as. Like, hey, look, you can come here. If you've never worked TV, we'll teach you. We'll get you spun up on that. We'll get you on these low level deals where you'll be working per date. We'll get you on a little bit of a contract, but you can take your exposure that you get on our TV and your experience, and you can go take that on the indie scene. And not only that, whatever name we give you or whatever name we come up with or collaboration, you get to keep wherever you go. And that's why EC3 is EC3 in WWE, and he's EC3 in Ring of Honor. He was able to keep his name. And so they've kind of marketed themselves as such, as kind of a not really a destination, more of a temporary landing spot for guys. And it's probably a good place that if you're cut by WWE and you need a spot to rebuild your career a little bit and maybe tweak your character. And I think that we've seen that with W. Morrissey, where he was kind of the big cast guy, and he's come into Impact, and now he's becoming a deeper character than he ever was before. He's cutting promos better than he ever did it in his entire history in WWE. He is the most interesting that he's ever been, and because he's coming in a low pressure environment with one-on-one counseling and one-on-one producers and directors, and he's able to flourish in that environment. So it's a good spot to be for a talent, but I don't think it's a spot to be for forever, unless you're Eddie Edwards or Moose, who've been there forever.
It's funny you talk about that. I think Impact's a lot like Memphis, right? Because they had their core of guys that stayed there forever. Lawler, Dundee, the Jarretts, they stayed, right? And then you'd bring in all these other guys who would kind of rotate, do a cycle through, really find themselves. Rick Rude really finds himself in Memphis. Randy Savage becomes a star in Memphis. They move on and go somewhere else. But, Lawler stays. Tojo Yamamoto stays. Impact is kind of like, it's funny, they're in Tennessee. They're kind of running out of the same spots. They're kind of doing the same thing. They're the closest thing I think we have to like an old school territory in the way they do things.
So keeping on with this match, what did you think of the promotion of the match? I know that they didn't show it in full on their TV show. I think they was on like at the pre-show or something, right? Where they showed a lot of it, and then I'm sure they thought, well, in the back of our we'll put it on YouTube and people can go view it. I don't necessarily like watching wrestling on my computer a lot, and I really like watching it on the time when everyone else is watching it. What did you think of the strategy, JD? We'll stay with you. What did you think of the strategy and how they marketed this great wrestling match to their fan base?
I hated it. I thought it was a terrible idea because we have an Impact podcast and neither of us watch BTI. Like, we just don't watch it. So it's unnecessary viewing. I thought it was a stupid idea. But I think the results were pretty good because I don't know if the numbers have come back for it, but I guarantee that's going to be the most watched episode of BTI in history, right? But I don't know. I don't love the idea. I do think the idea of putting on the whole match on YouTube is a great one because being a Japanese fan and a fan of old wrestling, I do watch a lot of wrestling on my computer. So guys like me aren't opposed to it. I didn't love the marketing. I think the match overachieved in lives because the storyline leading up to it was really stupid too. But like the results were great. So I don't love it, but the way it's going to live on is on the internet. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be okay because the guys like Mike and I going, hey, watch this match. Mm-hmm. They're going to get far more people watching that way than would have tuned into it. So in the end of the day, it works, but I don't like a lot of the lead up to it.
Mike, what did you think?
Yeah, I didn't like putting it on a pre-show. Part of that is just selfish reasons because, it's hard to get me to watch 3 hours of wrestling TV in a night. It really is difficult. And so they just added an extra hour to my viewing. And so I kind of resented them for that. I personally would have just put it in the body of the TV show. And I know that, there's this fear that Iron Man matches historically probably have not done very well on television. But, it's not like Impact is really all that worried about their ratings every week. And honestly, they don't even get posted anymore. Show buzz is down and Dave doesn't really cover their weekly ratings. He talks about some of their DVR numbers, but you're not really going to get like a total viewership out of Dave in the Observer. And he just can't be bothered to go check that out. And I don't subscribe to the Torch, but I'm assuming they don't really cover it. So because they're not covering it, I'm not covering it because I don't have access to that information. So it's not in my weekly columns anymore. But I personally would have put it in the body of the show. But I did like that they added the final 10 to 15 minutes or so as the beginning of the show. And the one thing I did like about it is it reminded me of an episode back in 2006. And I put this in my column where the opening of the show was a match already in progress between Samoa Joe and Christopher Daniels, where they come on the air and you have Mike Tenay and Don West are going crazy, and Christopher Daniels is a bloody mess, and they're just going at it, and they have a hellacious X Division title match. And that it did remind me of that, and I thought that was probably one of the best openings to Impact that they had ever had. And so, the main audience got to see probably the most dramatic parts of the match, and they got to see Alexander beat up and them exhausted and really showed the heart that Alexander had. So I did think that was effective, but no, body of the show, please.
I do think it would have been a good test if for those guys, the executives who are really watching the ratings closely. You don't, if you promote, I mean, the thing is taped, it's great. And if you really hit hard on the marketing that this is a great match, and then you kind of watch and see, let's put it on the last hour, and you can really see, okay, what does our audience react to this long match? Or is it because, like you were saying, 60-minute match, the fans know, okay, we know we know when this thing's going to end, so maybe we'll turn it off and we'll come back right at the end. Like you'll learn that. And so I really thought that they could have learned something from their fan base about this match, and then you can go, oh, it worked. And then in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, and you go, okay, we're going to come back and do it again and see if it works again. So, I think it was possibly a lost opportunity, but maybe they got something out of the viewership in the way that they did it as well. But let's talk about the pay-per-view. It's this weekend, correct? It's not. Do they call them pay-per-views or the plus shows or whatever?
It's an Impact Plus special. It's kind of like what you would get on WWE Network, where it's their monthly network special essentially.
So I know that the storyline is Omega against Moose, but Callis and Omega are trying to get out of the match, and so Tony Khan has to come on to TV, which is in a couple days from us recording this. And the assumption is that he's adding Sami Callihan to make this a three-way. Now, I mentioned this on my podcast, on the Fight Game podcast with John LaRocca, which is, if you've been following wrestling for these last 6 weeks, we've seen a whole pay-per-view, WWE WrestleMania Backlash, where the men's title and the women's title were defended in three ways. AEW just had their men's title, or their world title, defended in a three-way, and now NXT's having a five-way for their title. So the fact that if they're going to add, which it seems like they're going to add Sami Callihan to make this another multi-man world title match, it seems like it's a little bit of overkill to me. JD, like, what are your thoughts on if they do make this a three-way?
You missed it. There's also going to be a six-way for the number one contender of the X Division title.
I did read about that.
Yes, there's even more. I hate. We talked about this on the show. I absolutely hate this. They've been building to adding Sami Callihan. We thought that it would be Callihan versus Omega at this show, right? But Mike said the moment it was Moose, Mike called it. He said they're going to make this a three-way. And I said, no, there's no way they're going to make this a three-way. He's like, no, this company loves three-ways. They're going to make it a three-way. Nah, Mike was right. They're making it a three-way.
Well, I mean, they've had some historically great three-ways. That those were the times when I was actually watching the product. But okay, so Mike, is the reason to add Callihan because you get another guy? You get this mystery, not really a mystery, but you change the main event. Maybe it adds some intrigue, but does it make it a better match? Because that's what I was wondering, if they are making this a three-way to make it a better actual match.
No, they're not making it a better match by adding Callihan. And that's not a knock on Callihan. I think Callahan's very good at what he does. I think that there are two reasons to add Callihan to this match. One, what you do is you create this mystery because the internet is already abuzz. How do you get the title off of Omega, right? Everybody's already speculating. How is this going to go down? So all the insiders are going to be looking at it. Okay, this is the time where they're going to take the title off Omega because Omega doesn't have to be pinned. And that's what they're going to be playing off of, right? So they have that going for them. And then the second reason why you add Callihan to the match is that Callihan loses. Every big match he's ever been in, he's lost. And ever, like literally, like I go back to the first pay-per-view that I watched of the Anthem owned, Impact was Slammiversary 2018. He lost in a hair versus hair match against Pentagon Jr., one of my favorite matches in the company, right? It's right there behind that Iron Man match. And ever since there, boom, Brian Cage lost, Tessa Blanchard lost, Eddie Edwards multiple times lost. That's what he does. He gets beat, and he still looks good after the getting beat. He has a unique ability to lose every big match and then still get big matches. And so I think that's why he's in the match, because Moose has been their most protected guy for the last 3 years. He's only lost one pay-per-view or two pay-per-view matches in 3 years. One being most recently to Rich Swann at Sacrifice to set up the match with Swann against Omega at Rebellion. So yeah, he's only lost two matches on pay-per-view in the last 3 years. And so I think that, if there is a guy in the company to take the title off of Omega later, I think it's Moose, but maybe that's not time yet.
But it sounds like, if based on your booking or how you see this going, that it could be Omega and Moose at Slammiversary, or am I way off on that?
My prediction would be Omega and Eddie Edwards, because Eddie did have an appendectomy at the last set of tapings. So that, at the last show, Under Siege, the co-main event was a six person tag, and it was Eddie Edwards and Finn Juice against the Good Brothers and Omega, and Eddie Edwards was the one that got the pinfall in that, and so I think they were kind of trying to set him up for a future shot at Omega. So that's kind of where I'm thinking they're going to go for Slammiversary, but I could see them doing a 6-way at Slammiversary too, because that's just what Impact does.
JD, so are there any? What are the other matches you're looking forward to on this special? I know Kojima, at least this is according to Wikipedia. I don't know. I know that this stuff has been taped for a while now, but it's Kojima and Doring. I know we already talked about Rich Swann and Morrissey. What else are you looking forward to outside of the main event?
Kojima and Doring is the one that I'm curious about, and that's the can they turn the clock back match? Because Joe Doring, I've had some big time questions about him because I'm a big All Japan guy. I love old Joe Doring stuff. He was awesome, like 2016, 2017. He was really good, and he's really beat up. And I even speculated that when he hit his crossbody a couple weeks ago, they edited around it so much because it didn't look good. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but it was something I was thinking about. So they're giving a lot of rope to Doring, more than I expected. And I'm super curious to see what that match is going to look like. Because 5 years ago, it would have been awesome. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know what that looks like because he hasn't had many singles opportunities. But Joe, I think in my head of what Joe Doring should be, and another match with Kojima would be great. But I don't know what that looks like in 2021. So that's the match that I'm the most curious about. I don't know if I'm excited about it, but I'm curious about it. My mind keeps going back there.
You use the word opportunity, and all I can hear is WWE, Drew McIntyre, my championship opportunity.
So when you don't watch WWE, you don't know when you fall back into their speak. So for me, I'm free. I can use the word opportunity without feeling stupid saying it.
All right, Mike, what about you? What else are you looking forward to on the show?
The Kojima Joe Doring match. I watched their match from, I would say, 2010 here recently. And I loved that match. Do I think it's going to be as good as that match? No. But I like JD, I am oddly curious about how this is going to turn out. And plus I just like Kojima. I just think he's awesome. So the fact that, I never thought that he would ever be in the company, especially it wasn't that long ago where Anthem kind of shit-canned the New Japan show on Access, right? And so for them to actually be in business together again, I think is really cool. And I think that's a credit to Scott D'Amore and his leadership ability to be able to bridge that gap, and the Good Brothers too, with their and Rocky Romero and those guys. So I think just the fact that he's going to be there, and then having the opportunity to maybe see Joe Doring be able to give us one last big match again. I think that's going to be kind of cool. I'm really excited to see that. And then of course, look, as much as fun as I make of 6-way matches, I don't like them for title matches. But if you're going to throw all the X Division guys in a match and let them open up the show, those are always fun. It's always a train wreck, and it's probably going to be about 12 minutes and a bunch of kickouts and all that stuff and every move you've ever seen. And so I think that match is probably going to be really good.
So I know this airs on, what is it, the 12th here. So what does that make it, Saturday?
Saturday, yeah.
But has this already been shot? Has it been taped? Okay,
oh, yeah.
So this is already in the can. So I'm, I guess spoilers are just not out because people.
There's no fans.
Yeah,
It's easy to keep them secret.
yeah.
Okay, so can we before we get out of here, can we talk a little bit about the upcoming Slammiversary? Because Mike, you had a campaign about fans, and you even got on the media call, and the guy probably lied right to your face.
Oh yeah,
and because they announced it was a couple days later, They said that the fans are coming back for Slammiversary, but it's a very small amount of fans, and I think they put those tickets on sale or whatever, and they sold out, right?
Yeah, they sold out in 20 minutes, and I made the joke. It's like, oh wow, that's probably a ticket per minute.
So is it really only going to be 20 people, or you think it's more like 100?
Probably about 100, and
Okay.
they sold them at $250 a pop, and like you get meet and greets, and you get gift bags, and
I saw that. That was pretty
all
cool.
that stuff. Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat. And so when someone tried to argue with me today on Facebook, not in our group and in a different group, because I put the clip of our show that we added to the YouTube channel. I put that in that Facebook group, and somebody was like, I don't know why you think Ross was lying to you. They legitimately didn't know. And I was like, well, they did have a full press release ready for the moment the show ended. They had the pricing set up. They had the ticket. They had the Eventbrite site set up. They had all this other stuff set up. Maybe they waited until after he said that to me to actually start the process, but chances are they freaking knew what they were doing, and the guy lied to me. And I am not mad at that. He should have lied to me. They wanted to make the announcement themselves. Yeah. But who I'm mad at is the rest of the so-called media that was on that call that chose not to actually push the issue. They just asked a bunch of, hey, who's your favorite wrestler kind of questions, right? And so I felt like as a pseudo member of the media that we should be asking real questions, and so I did.
I'm just glad that Gail Kim wasn't the one who lied to you. That one would have broken my heart.
Mine too.
I don't know if this is true, but supposedly, if Dave and I are in Vegas, we get to eat for free on Robert and Gail, supposedly. Oh. So I'm very hopeful that now that we're back in business, that offer still stands. So I'm a big fan right now of both of them. So let's talk a little bit about some of the interest going into Slammiversary. We still got this show to go. We don't know the matches for Slammiversary yet, but there is intrigue in guys who were let go, guys and girls who were let go from WWE. I think this is like 2 cuts prior, and their 90 days are coming up right before Slammiversary, correct?
Yeah.
Do you have any favorites that you would like to see, possibilities of guys who you think that Impact should be 100% on it to bring in?
Well, in a perfect world, it's Samoa Joe. He is an Impact legend. He's a future Impact Hall of Famer should he decide to do that. So, I mean, and I thought he was the biggest name of all the people that were cut, and these are the April cuts. So, Samoa Joe. I did think it would have been nice to see Mickie James. She was on NWA tonight. I don't think we're going to see Mickie James. She must have gotten out of her non-compete early. I guess whenever they sent her crap in a trash bag, she must have worked out a deal.
Garbage Gate ruined that.
Yeah. So I think Garbage Gate, they went ahead and let her out of her non-compete early, and now she's doing some NWA stuff, which I think we all kind of speculated anyway, given her husband's the champion there. But yeah, Samoa Joe, I would probably be right at the top of my list. Impact did bring in Steve Macklin, aka Steve Cutler, and so Wesley Blake was a part of those cuts. And so I think that seeing those guys team up again, they were a pretty decent tag team. They're not going to be guys that draw a lot of interest for a pay-per-view. I don't think that is a big deal, them being on the show. But anything outside of Samoa Joe, I don't really think is going to draw too much interest. A lot of people talking about the Iconics. I've never cared about the Iconics. I think they're hot, so people like to be nice to them, right? And so
they also do seem like nice people, like when you see them with fans and stuff. So I think that's also part of it.
Right.
We have a tag division too that has no competitors. Yes, so the Iconics make sense.
Yes, so they would actually plus up the tag division by 100%. So they would be the other team in the division. And honestly, right off the top of my head, man, I can't even remember who all got cut in April.
I can't keep track of the cuts, man.
I know.
Because I was trying to wrap my head around who was just cut last week.
Weren't they trying to tease Daniel Bryan too?
Yeah.
That ain't gonna happen. No.
I have a better shot at showing up at Slammiversary than Daniel Bryan.
$250, man. You just need to get one of those tickets.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, JD, I didn't ask you. Was there? Because my thought is, if you tell me Samoa Joe and Kenny Omega is going to happen at a future pay-per-view,
sign me up.
Like I'm going to Meltzer's and watching my first Impact pay-per-view probably since the one of the Tessa Sami Callihan matches.
Really? That's I'm mind blown on that one. Yeah, no, Joe and Kenny Omega, that's a match like that.
Mhm.
I hope he's healthy enough because I think they could really sell some pay-per-views. Like I know people want Samoa Joe everywhere because he's Samoa Joe. I hope he can wrestle. I hope that he's healthy, and I hope that he does come back to Impact because they could use him right now. Quite frankly, they could use a legend because it makes sense storyline wise. You've got the guy who I don't know if you really call him a TNA original, but I mean like he has that kind of a long storied history in TNA, and he could be a guy who comes in and challenges the outsider who has the title. Like there's the story line potential is so perfect there. So if it's not Joe, I'm going to be a little not disappointed, but I mean, I think that's going to be I'll say it'll be a bit disappointing if it isn't Joe.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, last year, so I think they brought in like 4 or 5 people from those cuts last year, from the April cuts, and the biggest names being the Good Brothers, and then they brought in Heath and Brian Myers and Deonna Purrazzo. I think those are the big ones. For the life of me, I can't remember who was cut in April other than Samoa Joe, the Iconics, Mickey James, and Wesley Blake. So Kalisto. I think Kalisto was fired too. So maybe he'll show up. I don't know.
Sure.
He's great. He's underrated. They just no one ever could figure out what to do with him. Okay, so let's actually we'll shut it down here. But for the people who are listening on the Patreon on the Fight Game Media Network, you don't need to listen to this. You can cut off the show. We're gonna do the hard sell on the YouTube version of this show. Mike, you do a great sell every week on Braced for Impact. Tell people about what they can hear you and JD every week.
Well, one of the things that I love about mine and JD's show is that, we like the show, we like Impact, but we're not fanboys, right? If something sucks, we're going to say it sucks. If something's great, we're going to say it's great. We're going to tell you why we think it's great. If something sucks, we're going to say, hey, this sucks, and this is why, and this is what we think would be better. Right. So we're not the hardcore fanboys that just love everything that they do. That's just not who we are. We also have a lot of fun banter. We're going to bust each other's balls. We're going to make fun of a lot of things. We're going to have fun. So even if you're not an Impact fan, I think that you'll actually get something out of our show. Right. If you're not watching the weekly show, if you just choose not to watch, you don't got that much time. But hey, you're at work and you got, you're able to dig into your couch cushions. You got $2.99 just laying around. You want to throw us some cheddar. Put our show on. I think you're going to be very entertained by our show each and every week. We do it every Thursday night. It usually drops about Friday morning. So on your way to work, you should be able to kick it on and have a fun time listening to it. And if you do want to get back into Impact, I think the best way to do that is to be able to listen to our show. We're going to talk about the characters. We're going to explain the characters. We're going to tell you who's fighting who and why. And we're going to tell you, why certain things are stupid and why the certain things shouldn't be done the way that they're being done. But I tell you what, Impact Wrestling, for all its faults, has been one of the more enjoyable things that I've been able to watch of the last 3 years. I watch only Dynamite and Impact every week. Those are my 2 weekly habits, right? Everything else, I'm just watching big shows from now on. Like I'll watch the WWE big shows. I'll watch, all the other big shows that are out there. But right now, my 2 favorite shows each week have been Dynamite and Impact. And some weeks Impact's a little bit better, some weeks Dynamite's a little bit better, but it's always a mostly enjoyable experience. But it's not as enjoyable as listening to me and JD for $2.99.
And I mean, I just want to make sure that people know JD also does another show with Justin, and you guys talk Japanese wrestling, high tension, and you are a very hardworking person because I know those shows with Justin can go pretty long sometimes, and they're very, very, very thorough what you guys do. So
unfortunately, sometimes Justin and I will have a 40-minute conversation before we start the show, and then the next thing I know, it's 2 a.m. in Chicago, and I'm like, I gotta get up with a 5-year-old in 4 hours. So yeah, I love the conversations Justin and I have because we really like Justin is one of the most unique podcasters in wrestling because he really like thinks about wrestling differently, and he challenges me to think about wrestling differently. So I jokingly called myself a snob on the show once, and Justin was like, "No, man, we're not snobs." I said "me," but pick up the sword, man. Pick up the sword. So, but he was like, "No, we think about things," and he's right. Like we try to take a different look toward I'm a totally different show than what Mike and I have. Mike and I crack jokes. Like I joke, Mike has all the scoops, and I'm just there to crack jokes. Like when it's me and Justin, we really try to get in depth and thorough, and I get to use the other side, the more analytical, the writing side of my brain, talking about Japanese wrestling on High Tension. It's what's cool about this Patreon network is that you have so much different content and so many different people that are presenting perspectives that might be a little outside of what you like. Because I like what we do, just we as in Fight Game in general, because there's people that think completely different from me that I never would have thought about things the way some of the guys on this network do. Like I like listening to, Paul and Parker's Dynamite show. I like listening to Robert and Carlos talk about boxing. I don't know anything about boxing, but I love listening. Or I love hearing those guys talk about it. Like, and when Ryan does the MMA, like I don't know anything about that, but I like learning, and I like sitting back and listening to people that are smarter than me. And it's such a great thing to have so much variety, and it's also accessible.
Yeah.
So it's an honor to be part of this team.
No, I love it. I love all the different perspectives that we bring. And, the only thing that I have asked is just nobody be a dick. Like just everyone be cool. Everyone be thoughtful.
Man, I'm trying.
And that's like my favorite thing about it is you can come in and listen and nobody listens to our guys and we do have a woman with Keela. And no one comes out of these conversations going like, wow, they're so unfair. They're just picking on X, Y, and Z. Like everyone is really thoughtful. So that's what I like. And cheap plug here. Carlos is out of town. He's on vacation. So for the Pound for Pound Boxing podcast, I'm going to join Robert for tomorrow's show, Wednesday. And we're going to talk about maybe the greatest sports docuseries that I've seen since The Last Dance, which was the Michael Jordan one, called The Kings on Showtime. So Carlos and I are going to break that down. Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Marvin Hagler, their whole series of fights. And yeah, so I'll be with Robert breaking that down. So I want to thank Mike, JD. You guys have been great. You guys have been great on the show. JD also writes a column of the same name that comes out on Saturday morning generally. So get your sorry. JD's written so many things for us in the past. But yeah, so check it out and go to patreon.com/fightgamemedia or just go to fightgamemedia.com and check out everybody's work. So one last plug, or doesn't have to be a plug, but JD, how's the book?
Which one?
The latest one.
Oh, I have two that are coming out within the next couple of weeks. So it's going pretty good.
So things are good with the book. If you JD isn't only he's not a one trick pony. He's an author with some fiction books. So if you want to check him out, how do they find you on Twitter?
Oh, it's easy. I'm at JD_Oliva. You can find me there. My books are all available. I've got 10 different books out on Amazon right now. Check it out on Amazon. They're all available there if you want to do some reading. Hopefully, got some new stuff coming up down the line. Hopefully, I can knock out 3 more books by the end of the year. So we'll see what happens.
Wow,
man. I haven't written anything on our website in a long time, and I'm fearful. And this guy's like ripping out 3 books. All right, so thanks to everyone for checking it out. Check out Mike, check out JD, find those guys on Twitter, and check out the network. So for Mike, for JD, I am Double G. We will see you when we see you. Peace out.